Hello, everyone, and welcome to Real Estate Right Now. My name is Jay Izzo, and we are live from the Linda Craft Team Studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina, part of the Research Triangle Park. And I'll tell you something, today's show, oh man, it's going to be a good one. I'll tell you why, because, here's the deal. If you've ever been, in that home selling, home buying experience, one of the places where things kind of can get hung up is the inspection report. Let's be honest, that can be a deal breaker. And oh boy, can it be a deal breaker, because it affects both sides, right? I mean, because if we think about it, right, you've got the seller, right, who, is trying to get his house or her house sold, right? And then the inspection report comes, from the buyer, and then the buyer goes and the seller goes, oh, I'm not making those repairs. And then the buyer goes, but you got to make those repairs. And then the seller says, well, I'll make these repairs. And then the buyer says, no, I want all the repairs. And then this is where deals can fall apart, right? All right, so I've got an expert with me, and Nogui Aramburo. He is a closing manager at Linda Craft Team Realtors. And then we're after that, right? Because he handles these inspection reports regularly, daily, right? But then after that is, well, how do we fix this stuff, right? And then we have got Ben Perrou from RCS, who's going to join us, remediation. And we're going to talk about a whole bunch of things on how we remediate some of these inspection, and also what are some of the more serious challenges to an inspection report. So before we get started, let's get started with Nogui here. Nogui, welcome back.
Thank you, sir. Happy to be here.
It's great to see you again. You've been on before, and you've been great. Matter of fact, the ratings were outstanding. I think as I last recall, your ratings were just far and above.
I love it.
You had great ratings. So you've been a closing manager here at Linda Craft Team for.
I have been a closing manager for about 10 years here. Okay. Actually, it's a little more than 10 years now.
More 10 years now.
Yeah.
So the inspection report, the dreaded inspection report, right? And as I did the intro, I'm sure you were thinking about this too. This is where oftentimes tensions get a little bit heated. Am I right in that when it comes to the inspection report?
Yes, absolutely. There's so many emotions involved in purchasing a home, period.
Right.
You have so many people involved in the process. I think about 200 people are involved in the process of selling a home.
Wow.
So your buyer, the typical buyer has to deal with many aspects in a buying transaction. The home inspection is could be one of the highly charged and emotional ones.
And I think I can understand it. I mean, I think, here's the seller. They're just trying to sell their home, right? And then here's the buyer, and listen, I mean, if it's a resale home, which typically we sell a lot of resales, more so than new homes. When it's a resale home, buyers still can sometimes have a mentality of, I want perfection, right? I want it perfect. And then all of a sudden they go have an inspection report, which they should do, right? I mean, they should have an inspection report. Right?
Absolutely. 100%.
And because, I mean, you want to know what you're getting, but then when you come back, now all of a sudden you see this big, huge report, because it's a lot of pages, right? I mean, how many pages is a typical inspection report?
It could be 100, 150 pages, just depending on what's on there.
That would freak me out.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
I mean, isn't that a little bit freaky to especially if you're a first time buyer and all of a sudden you got a 150 page inspection report.
So the inspection report is basically the opposite of the listing, right? Because when the buyer saw the listing online, saw all the beautiful photos, and they fell in love with the home, it's that listing agent's job to display the home in the most perfect way possible, with the best pictures, the best staging, having it look top notch. And then you get under contract and you have a professional home inspector go in there, and his job is to tell you everything that's not top notch in that house. And his camera is not the best camera. So the photos don't look great, and they're not at a great angle. And he points out everything that's wrong with the home. So you can imagine your expectations going in. You're like, oh my God, this beautiful house. But the guy went into the crawl space and,
he found
there's problems. He found something.
He found something, right?
Yes.
Or
yes.
he found something around the toilet, or he found something that had previously been there
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So, okay. So I have to imagine in your position as a closing manager, that, a buyer gets this huge report
Mhm.
back. And I can imagine there's got to be times where they want to just bail and just go, I want to bail on this. How do you keep them in it?
So you have to know, number one, what type of personality you're working with, right? So depending on that personality is how I approach them.
Yeah.
I try to put myself in their shoes. I mean, I've been a home buyer, a home seller, so I've done it all.
Right.
But I try to see where they're coming from, at the same time understanding that they might be moving here for a job.
Right.
They might be going through some some issues, personal family issues.
Right.
There's so much pressure. They're putting down 25% down.
Right.
They got a lot of money tied up. When money
Right.
gets involved, it can get very stressful. So what I try to do is keep that in mind. Right. Keep in mind that you're working with human beings under a lot of stress.
Right. Right.
And you have to just know how to handle that. So I try to approach every personality based on the kind of feel I get from them in that original introduction phone call.
Okay, so we get this inspection report. Now, one of the things about the inspection report that you pointed out to me before the show was that there are certain things that an inspector just has to look for and has to put on the inspection report, right?
That is correct. There are certain things on there that they're just required. There's a board in North Carolina for home inspectors, just like appraisers, just for real estate professionals. So there's a board, and they have certain guidelines that they have to follow.
Right.
So there's things that they have to put on the inspection report that may not necessarily be problems, but they're required to disclose that.
To disclose it.
Yes, sir.
So here's the thing, right? The 150 pages isn't all 150 pages of problems, right? I mean, we should make that clear.
That's right. Yeah. For the most part, there could be, anywhere from 5 to 10 issues. And then there might only be 1 or 2, what you would consider major problems.
Okay.
But for the most part, you could have simple things like gutters being full of leaves.
Right.
That's just a service call, minor things like the electrical plate is loose, or there's a light bulb that's burnt out, things like that. They're more of a cosmetic nature. They're not things to freak out about.
But I'm thinking here as a buyer sometimes that they get this long list, and even though they may be small things like the gutter is full of leaves, or the plate's a little loose, or the light bulb is not working, or the seal around the toilet is maybe needs a little more caulk or whatever, or tiles come a little bit loose. I mean, and it just piles. I can only imagine as a buyer, you just get piles on, even though they're all little things, right? That's the piece where I think gets extraordinary. That how do they? Because I can see them wanting to go, calling you on the phone, go, Nogui, there's 90 things wrong, and you're going, but there's not one of them here that's over $10 here.
That's right, and that's because you had a really good inspector that was very detailed and saw all those things, but in reality, the house is fine, but the inspector, this is what you hire them for. They're there to look at everything from top to bottom.
And I think too, right? I think one of the things that happens here, not only there's so emotional, right? But then there's the other side of it. I mean, there are some times where on the other side of it, there are critical things that happen. So, okay, let's talk about a couple of critical things that you've seen that you go, okay, this is where we had to negotiate hard, and how you had to deal with that.
Yes. One, what I would consider critical things is mold in the crawl space. We live in a high humidity state, and if you have a crawl space and your water's uncontrolled, or you have your ducts running under your house, and they get because they create moisture that drips down. If you don't have a vapor barrier, it can cause mold on your joists. Joists wood is just nothing but organic material
Right,
anyway. So,
right.
you know, with the humidity and all that, you know,
Right.
you start to create the spores and all that. And Ben Perrou, actually our next guest, he's going to probably go into
Yeah,
some
he will.
detail of that. So that could be an issue, especially if the buyer is a
But is it, I mean, but okay, let's take mold.
Mhm.
But I mean, it's something that could be, something that could be fixed.
Yes, yes. In almost every case, you can fix, you can remediate mold, you can remove it, you can encapsulate, you can partially encapsulate. I know a big thing now, a big trend is to encapsulate the whole cross space.
Right.
But I mean, you really could partially encapsulate it, not spend the same amount of money, and still,
Right.
remove the moisture issue completely
So okay,
without having it there.
let's just stay with mold here as a critical issue. Who's responsible for taking care of that repair?
That's a great question. That's a very good question.
Because I think naturally we want to say, oh no, the seller's
Right.
got to be responsible for
Yeah.
that. That's not necessarily true, is it?
And about probably about 50% of my calls with the buyer
Right.
is, well, that's the seller's responsibility, isn't it? And then I have to explain to them about caveat emptor.
Right.
Let the buyer beware. And
Right.
in North Carolina, and sometimes with the high emotion of things and the buyer signing the contract, even though the agent had went over that part,
Right.
they may not realize that a home conveys in the condition that it's in. There's no there's no guarantees that the seller is not obligated to do anything.
So we purchase homes, at least in North Carolina, as is.
Yes, sir. In the North Carolina offer to purchase contract, it clearly states that the home conveys in the condition that is in, but that doesn't necessarily mean as is.
Okay, all right. You got okay. You just okay. Okay. Help,
Okay.
Nogui.
Okay.
Untangle that one for us.
So the offer to purchase states that the home conveys in the condition that it is, with the seller not obligated to make any repairs.
Okay.
As is means that the seller has stated, I'm not doing anything. Okay.
Right.
In the offer to purchase, it says that the seller does not have to do anything.
Okay.
But it doesn't mean that they're not going to do anything.
Got it.
Okay. So it's always a negotiation. Like you said, the seller and buyer takes two to tango.
Right.
They want to sell the house. The buyer wants to buy the house. So there's going to be some kind of meeting of the minds there.
Right.
But it's definitely not as is when you buy like a foreclosure or some situation like that, where it's strictly, it's stipulated, hey, nothing's going to get done.
Right.
But in the contract, it says that the home conveys in the condition that it's in its current condition, but not that the home conveys as is.
Okay. So I think that's a really great point, is that people need to understand that the seller is under no obligation.
That is 100% correct.
But it's negotiable.
It's negotiable. The buyer reserves the right to do inspections within the due diligence period, and to submit to request repairs from the seller.
Okay.
Even though the seller is not obligated to do anything, part of the process, part of the due diligence process, is for an inspection to take place and for repairs to be requested. It's all in the contract. You're allowed.
Right.
You reserve the right to request repairs.
How many times have you seen a buyer say, okay, this is just so big, I don't want to go through with purchasing the house? How often do you see that?
It's rare. It's rare.
Really?
Yeah, it's rare.
I would think
You're correct in that. There's always going to be problems. There's no such thing as a clean home inspection. You're always going to find some sort of issues, but most issues can be resolved with if both parties are reasonable,
Right.
which is what, you know, we try to do. We try to work within the spirit of the transaction of
right.
what we're trying to do here. You got one party that wants to sell, one party that wants to buy, and then we just have this situation here in the middle, right?
Right.
And we try to work through that, the best way we can, even if we're looking at, even if the seller, doesn't want to make any repairs. We still try to, we have our ways to work, get a seller to work with us and get, to do what we need done.
By the way, you got a fan.
I do?
Yeah, Krisha just said, "Hey, Nogui." So
that's right.
You got a fan.
Hey, Krisha.
So that's pretty awesome that you got a fan. All right, let's talk about some other specific things, because I think something on the inspection report that you and I talked about before the show that happens all the time, and people have all sorts of questions all over the United States about this, is polybutylene piping, right? It's not always a problem, is it?
Polybutylene is not always a problem, and I hope we don't get flamed for that.
Well, I mean, right? I mean, just because you have polybutylene piping,
right,
doesn't necessarily mean that you have to change the piping.
I read it all over the internet, Jay. It's got to go.
It's got to go.
No, I'm just kidding. Polybutylene is one of those things that, it's a highly charged type of topic because, it's discussed everywhere that, you have polybutylene, you absolutely need to replace it. And maybe in certain places you do.
Right.
Maybe certain climates that might be true. Maybe the way the polybutylene was installed and the type of fittings that were used in those cases, yes, they do need to replace. But if they're not leaking, if the fittings are copper, have been done with copper, I've seen polybutylene that rivals just regular pipe.
So it just doesn't have to be. It's not just because it says polybutylene doesn't mean that it's a problem.
It doesn't mean that it's a problem. And typically what we do in that situation is I basically explain that to the buyer, say, hey, look, it's not leaking. Yes, it was a problem. A lot of it did fail and was replaced. But, this has been here for, a few decades.
Right.
And the home inspector went through. He didn't see any leaks. Maybe we get a plumber. Let's hire a plumber to go in and take a further look. But more than likely, that plumber is going to come to that same conclusion, because if you got a leak, you're going to see water. And, and if it's leaked, then it's a problem. But for the most part, if it's still good 20, 30 years later, it's probably going to wear out at the same rate of any other plastic.
So what are some other red flags when you're looking at an inspection report where that you go, okay, we're going to have to address this? What are some other big ones?
Red flags could be a really worn out roof where you have, the inspection in the attic, the sheathing, the wood sheathing, you have moisture in there. There could be mold already. Water's got in, and that's a problem.
Okay, so that's a red flag.
That is definitely
because the inspector no longer. It used to be that the inspectors used to go up on top of the roof and inspect the roof. They don't do that anymore. They do a visual inspection with binoculars or something like that, right?
Yep.
So, what they do is, I guess they figure out, how long the roof been on there and ask questions, those type of things. But you're saying they go from the inside and take a look, and they could see if there's obvious signs of leakage.
It's really from the inside. You could tell if the roof has failed. If you can see it on the inside, if there's, moisture on the inside and active leaks, because there could be moisture on the sheathing, staining from water. But, that was maybe when they replaced the roof a few years ago. It could be an old leak that was fixed. That's not a problem. Is when you go in and you have other telltale signs like moisture, high level of moisture, a lot of staining, deteriorated sheathing. You see that as well. If you see something like that, that's a red flag.
So what happens in the inspection report when it comes to a roof? Let's say we've got a bad roof. How is that? Is it handled the same way? I guess you should just tell me, how is that handled?
Typically, what we would do is we would ask for a roof replacement.
Okay.
Um, just being 100%. Hey, look, I mean, your roof is shot, Mr. Seller, and you need a roof. And a lot of times they probably know. They've been in the home a long time. They bought it. The roof was old when they bought it. They're like, maybe they're saying, hey, let's try to sell this house before the roof goes.
No, they would not do that. No, nobody would do that.
But a lot of times they know about these things. And in my experience, most sellers that we've worked with have done something, provided some sort of concession for that.
Okay. What's another red flag?
Let's see. Another red flag is aluminum wiring.
Okay.
Especially unconverted aluminum wiring. So like this is wiring that was done like in the 60s, and
you're buying an older home. You're buying an older home, right?
You're buying an older home,
historic district,
and in a lot of the older homes, the wiring had been converted. Right. And there's things that they can do. You can convert all your switches, your plates,
right,
so that there isn't that heat from the copper to the electrical. And and a lot of times you see that in a home that hasn't been converted. Is something like that could start a fire. So
gotcha.
Something like that you would want to
okay, let's flip the switch. See what I did there? I know it was awful. Let's see what I did. Okay, let's flip the switch.
Got me.
What are things that look like a red flag but are really not?
Gosh, there's a lot of things that look like red flags but are really not. There could be on the inspection report missing electrical plates. There could be debris in the gutters. We talked about that. Loose toilet bases. It just needs a ring around it.
Right.
But in the inspection report, it looks worse than what it is.
Right.
And we talked about the poly. Not always the poly is bad. Siding, sometimes you might run into the hardy board masonite type of siding,
and it's chipped.
It's chipped and unmaintained,
right? And so then everybody goes, "Oh my gosh, it's awful!" But it's hardy plank.
Yeah, hardy plank and not masonite. Masonite is really the problematic one, but the cement fiber, that type of siding is pretty good. But it could look,
because it's some of this is about, is it serving the function that it's intended to function, right?
And a lot of times this stuff, like it's been on the home for a few years, and it might have like the siding might have shifted a little bit. There might be a little bit of gaps. Maybe they install it with gaps because they got a good backer, but the inspector is going to say, hey, you got a gap in your siding. Stone veneer on homes comes up every time there's a stone veneer on a home. It's on the inspection report, and most of the time those are non-issues, right? Most of the time this just
but then but people take them as serious issues.
They could say, yes, some people are very scared of those things. They may they don't even believe you, the professional. So in a case like that, I'll bring in a mason or a stone guy. I hire.
So you bring in a professional in to help them kind of relieve their fears about it. That
correct.
This is normal, or this is. I know that sometimes people get freaked out about a fireplace, right?
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with the fireplace, but they're looking at the age of it and they think, oh my gosh,
there's a fire. There's a fire hazard here.
Right.
Yep.
And that they can get a little bit freaked out about that. Okay. So you in the 10 years, and I know you've done it not just, well, it's more than 10 years here, but I know you were also doing this somewhere else prior to this. And so what's some of the craziest stuff?
Well, there's been a lot. But a couple of crazy things I saw was one time at in an inspection report, the inspector went down into the crawl space. It's one of those. It's not quite a basement, but it's a big enough crawl space where you could kind of walk in around
Right, yeah.
around there. And he was like, "Hey, I had to turn around because you got an Olympic sized swimming pool in here of water." So there's like 4 feet of water in this crawl space. Yeah.
Wow.
You imagine that?
No.
That is nuts. That is nuts. Yes. That was crazy,
Oh my gosh.
And I told the agent, I said, well, I didn't see a pool advertised here in the, I didn't know were we selling Vizcaya, did we have a pool under the house, I've seen where in the older homes, prior to a lot of like the permitting and really the counties really pushing with regulations, you had, people would pave over their septic.
Right.
They just, right where their septic tank was, they put gravel, put a driveway right over that, put a deck right over their over their septic. And after so many years of driving over their drain field, you just had everything coming out onto the backyard.
No.
And I've seen stuff like that too. So that's kind of the crazy.
Okay,
crazy
so
stuff
that's awful and smelly. Too.
Yes.
So before we wrap up here, and by the way, I can't believe how fast this.
Oh my gosh,
it went so fast. Before we wrap up here, what advice would you give buyers and maybe even sellers when it comes to looking at at an inspection report that would maybe help kind of put their mind and their emotions at ease? What advice would you give them?
I would, if I was a seller, I would think of, is this a safety issue, right? Is this a problem? Even though I'm selling this house and I'm moving and I'm gone, right? Do I want to leave this safety problem for the next person to come by? If you're a buyer, don't sweat the small stuff. If it's if it's minor items, don't sweat it. And if it's bigger items, hopefully we've been able to negotiate some type of concession for that. And you're trusting the professionals that you hire to represent you. Your agent's going to tell you. If somebody asks me, like if you as the client ask me, hey Nogui, would you buy this house? I tell them straight up the truth.
Well, I think the thing is, what you're really saying is that, you do the negotiating. They're not. So first things first, you're the professional.
Right.
You're going to be doing negotiating. You're not doing negotiating. Let me negotiate it. Right. Try to keep as much as you possibly can, keep your emotions in check. Right. I think is what you're saying. And then I think you're saying from a seller standpoint, look, just do the right thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Do the right thing. We're not saying that you have to do everything, but what's the right thing to do. Right. And And I think that's what you're really saying ultimately here.
Yeah. And on it, to be honest, the majority of people that I've worked with in this decade plus have been that way.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. You're going to run across people that are like, hey, I'm doing this. I'm doing zero for you. Maybe they're buying maybe they got a divorce situation and they, or, they bought a home that month before and their seller told them we're not doing squat. So, you're under contract now, and you're asking for repair. So it happens, but for the most part, we've been able to successfully, negotiate on behalf of our clients.
Well, Nogui, you've been great. It's gone so fast as it always does. And so tell people how they can get a hold of you if they have questions, because I know you're always one to answer questions.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, if you guys contact me, I'm happy to send you our maintenance checklist and what to look for in your home inspections and stuff like that. So you want me to give them my
email,
my phone number?
your email. Yeah.
Okay. So my email is Nogui, Nogui at lindacraft, LINDACRAFT.com. And my phone number is 919-771-3609. If you guys have any questions on the buying, home inspection, contract to close process,
Perfect.
give me a call. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Noakes.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, man.
Always a pleasure to be here.
Send Ben in.
You got it.
That was Nogui Aramburo with Linda Craft Team Realtors. He's closing manager and here, and he's been doing it for over a decade. And of course, he's been really been great. My next guest is Ben Perrou. He is your owner of RCS, right?
I'm the owner.
Yeah. Hey, good to see you, Ben.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you caught any of the show with Nogui. I don't know if you got to watch any of it before you got on here at all.
We were listening.
Oh, you were listening?
Yeah.
Okay. So Nogui, of course, is doing all these negotiatings. But then the thing is, some of this stuff has to be fixed.
Yeah.
And a lot of times people panic about, what's got to be fixed on an inspection report. When you look at an inspection report, because you're the one who's going to be fixing or handling a lot of these issues, when you look at it from a different perspective because they're emotionally vested into this house that they're doing. How do you look at an inspection report? When you look at it, do you look at it, oh, that's easy. How do you look at it?
To be honest, I look at it and if it's 60 pages, I know I'm only interested in about 3. They seem to be getting longer and longer. I saw a 200-page report.
No,
that was too much. It's too much.
Really?
And sometimes, like I said, I'm only interested in 3 or 4 pages.
Okay.
So I look at it, and anything's overwhelming.
Right.
But you have to sit down, you look at it, you break it down into parts.
Right.
We can do A, B, C, D. Any that's a good life lesson. Things that seem overwhelming, you just break them down into constituent parts, and you do it, and you're done.
Okay, so it's eating the elephant, right?
It's eating the elephant, one bite at a time.
Bite at a time. So when people bring you in from an inspection report, are they bringing you in typically for the big red flags, or could it be anything?
It depends. I'm kind of compartmentalized what I do now. I don't do as much general contracting.
Because you're a general contractor too, right?
I've kind of scaled that back now. But we've done it in the past,
right.
and I still have my electrician, a plumber. I still have everybody kind of on speed dial, and we still need them on some jobs, right? But the big things are roof, HVAC, of course, water intrusion, mold, odors, things like that. The big ticket items. Those are the big ticket items.
Yeah, although I know that here, because we live in a pretty humid state and in a pretty humid area, and places with high humidity have issues with mold typically.
Yep.
Right. It's pretty common. Is it a common issue?
I would be more surprised not to see a home inspection mention mold or water than I would be if it said it was. It's almost every property has a little bit of something going on, whether it's moisture intrusion around some flashing or in the crawl space or a roof leak. It just happens.
Is some molds more of a problem that you need to be concerned with than others?
Yes, there are some molds that are definitely allergenic and some that have been linked to cancer cause. That for cancer.
Okay.
They produce mycotoxins, just what mold produces. That's what when you walk in a room and says it smells musty, that's a volatile organic compound. If you break that down, some of those volatile organic compounds are mycotoxins, and that's what react to our body. And a lot of the molds that are allergenic are the kind of molds that we like, that are going to grow in the same temperatures and humidity that we like. So it's an environmental response to make us leave them alone so they can do their thing.
I got you. Okay. So because people are so interested in mold now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's been all sorts of news and things about mold over the years. It's not a new problem. It's just been something ongoing. But is there, how do you know if you've got bad mold or good mold, or bad mold or severe mold, or this is mold I need to fix, or is all mold need to be fixed?
Mold is a symptom. So if you see mold growing, you have other issues. But there are some molds that are more problematic. So, and those are typically related to long-term water damage. And those are the ones we definitely need to take care of. But the mold that you see in your shower grout, just clean that. You don't need to get me out there.
Okay.
But if you've had a leak in the basement that you didn't see for a couple months, that's the kind of mold that's going to be harmful to your health. And that's when you need a professional to come in.
Okay. Is there without an inspector, is there something that the homeowner could see or smell that they should go, hey, I need to call Ben?
Smell is the first thing. Smell. And I say this truthfully and honestly, having worked with people for as long as I have. Women can smell things that men will never smell. And trust your wife or trust your girlfriend if she goes into a house and says it smells musty, because there's probably an issue.
Trust me. Let me just say this. Linda can smell things that I just can't smell. I'm telling you, that should go, do you smell that? And I'll go, no, I don't.
Well, I'll tell you, we do fire restoration, right? So one day we're sitting in our house. My wife says, I smell smoke. And I said, you're crazy. She says, I smell smoke. I said, you're crazy. I walk all day long. My wife's telling me there's something burning in our house. And I kept telling her she was crazy. And finally she bugged me enough. I said, and I walked around the house, couldn't find anything, going in the crawl space, and our hot water heater's on fire. So she could smell the little electrical conduit burning. So so now I trust her 100%. When she says she smells something, I'm on my game. I have to get on the game. But it's just an example of women can smell things that men can't. They know.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
It's just so funny. Okay. So, but smell is the first thing. I know that sometimes when we have some water damage, you can start to see these black spots show up. Is that something that we probably need to call you and have you remediate, or what's your thoughts there?
It would probably be a good idea to at least get my opinion on it. Sometimes a picture does just enough. But again, this is where the mold is a symptom of the underlying problem. So if you've got a leak if you've got mold growing on your ceiling, you've had a leak up there somewhere.
Right.
So it may be that if it's isolated to an area about the size of a dollar bill, maybe get the plumber out there to check what's leaking. And when he cuts out the hole, he may do the entire remediation just by cutting out that little bit of stained drywall.
Got it.
But sometimes if you're immunocompromised or you have young children, it might be worthwhile to have a professional cut out that little area just to make absolutely sure that it doesn't spread. Because you've got to imagine the remediation is a fancy word for detailed cleaning. So if we have to control it and clean it in a way that it doesn't impact the rest of the property or the structure.
All right. So one of the things that Nogui brought up in prior to you coming on is we had a little discussion about polybutylene piping. And he said, not all polybutylene piping is a problem.
My house has polybutylene piping.
Right. And I think people, when they hear it, and I think because it got such a bad rap, I think in the late 90s and beyond, that people got such a bad rap. Help people understand that not all polybutylene is actually a problem.
It's not. I mean, it's only, if it fails, it fails. It's just like any other product. Some of the products, I think within the next 15 or 20 years, we're going to see something come out that say fiberglass insulation is as bad as asbestos. Every home in North America has some fiberglass insulation in it. So things evolve, practices evolve. The polybutylene piping is no different. If you're living in a house that's 10 or 15 years, now it's getting closer to 30 or 40 years old. If it fails now, maybe it's because it's time just to replace the piping, period. It's not necessarily the product. But like I said, my personal home has polybutylene piping, and my theory on it is if it's not leaking, I'm certainly not going to tear my house out. It's functioning as intended. I think that's a key real estate phrase. It's functioning as intended. Don't get too upset about it.
Okay. So one of the things that I know that you guys do is, like, let's say a house had a fire, right? And you know how that smoke kind of gets in the walls and it can get into the insulation and everything. And a lot of people will go, oh my gosh, this house had a fire. Oh, that's a problem. It's not a problem, is it? Because you guys can remediate that.
It can be fixed.
So how does that process work?
Typically, it depends on the severity of the fire, right?
Okay.
Most of the fires that happen in homes happen in either the crawl space a wall cavity because of electrical short or a lightning strike to the roof. If it's the roof structure, you definitely want to get an engineer in to make sure the trusses are repaired correctly. Once the structure is safe, you do some exploring, find where the smoke was, and then it's a clean seal paint. So you clean it with the appropriate chemicals, and there's actually sponges that are made specific for the restoration industry that have an ionic charge to them. So as you wipe them across the wall, they'll pick up anything that's got a charge to it, which is smoke and some long chain carbon odors. They pick them up. You physically remove it. That's the clean. You seal it with an oil-based primer, and then you paint it, and you're done. You should be done at that point. Anything that's porous should be, like carpet's probably going to have to be removed. The ductwork probably has to be removed. But everything else, structural-wise, the walls, the trim, the wood, baseboards, flooring, as long as it's solid, it should be salvageable.
That's interesting because, I think sometimes people think, oh my gosh, this house has had a partial fire and it must be a real big problem, but it's not necessarily a real big problem.
I've been in houses that we found that there had been a fire in the house and they didn't even know it.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
How did you find it?
Up in the attic. I've seen them in the attic where 1 or 2 trusses have been charred, where they had a lightning strike and they thought maybe it was just the tree that got hit and not the house. I've been in crawl spaces where I could see where an electrical short happened, and the people, you go inside and say, "Hey, you've had a fire in your crawl space." Said, "Oh, okay." And I say, "Do you have an outlet that doesn't work?" "Oh yeah, we got a couple outlets that don't work. That circuit's bad." "Well, it's bad because it caught on fire." But I mean, and then I've been to total losses before, where we have to. Those are sad.
Right.
Water is usually repairable. You can dry things out, but fire is kind of a terminal event. Once property burns, your stuff burns, is gone.
Let's talk about water. Back to water just for a second, because something occurred to me. One of the things is we've had a hot summer.
Yeah,
and so that air conditioning unit, and that usually that's up in that, that's got that water pan that is dripping. Typically drips a little bit. Sometimes it gets clogged.
Yeah,
and help people understand that maybe they need to go up in their attic and check that.
It's good to take a look. Most of the systems these days, within the last 5 years at least, have at least 2 redundancies.
Oh,
so redundancy mean if the pipe stopped up, the unit shuts off. They have them in the trap and in the pan. But it's important to remember that a standard 2-ton air conditioning system, which would be common on most homes, would have 1 or 2 of those in their home. A standard 2-ton air conditioner is going to produce 5 to 7 gallons of water a day.
Really?
So if it's clogged in the attic, you're talking about a lot of water that could potentially be coming down, especially if you're out of town on a vacation.
Right.
That can impact your home.
Yeah, because I think I know, like in past houses, maybe not so much frequent now, but I still go check it. Because
you should. And what'll happen a lot of times if you have blown in insulation, things move around a little bit in the attic, and that little fiberglass, the white fiberglass will get stuck in the pan and it clogs it up. It was the old saying, an ounce of prevention, a pound of cure, So I would say that you should walk your property every couple months at least, just all the little minor things. If you, the best thing to do, if you have an ongoing termite bond or an ongoing pest, they're going to go your attic and your crawl space every 3 months. So they're kind of a first line defense. But anything that you can catch is better because it saves you money on your property expenses, but also can save you money on the units themselves. So I would say it's always good to poke around your house occasionally. And especially with crawl spaces, they're scary. Nobody wants to go in there, but everybody can open the door and shine a light. just kind of look around, make sure everything's okay. Nothing's living under there. We have found people under crawl spaces before and tall crawl spaces camped out. So it does happen, but you may want to check.
So what are some like homeowner tips that you can, like checking that water pan where the air conditioner is? What are some other homeowner tips that you would recommend that people do as they're checking their home, that you would recommend that they do a regular checkup?
Just look. I mean, things don't happen, right? Excuse me, things can build up, but if you're constantly looking, and when I say constant, I mean not every day you need to check your crawl space, but if you're around the corner of the house mowing the grass or working on the yard,
Right.
Just look in your door every couple
Right.
weeks. Just make sure things aren't happening inside your house. You know it if something happens inside.
Right.
But you just need to. I mean, it's part of the for most people, the home is the most important and biggest investment they
Right.
have.
Yeah.
It's work. I mean, you would freak out if the bank wasn't looking after your money. Why don't you look after your own money?
Right.
Go look in the attic. Go look in the crawl space.
Right.
And most things, if you see something concerning, call a professional or call somebody
Right.
or next door or call your real estate agent. They
Right,
they have
right,
a whole list of
Right.
contractors. But there's ways to find the right person to help you out.
Right. Yeah, because I think sometimes what we do is that we ignore stuff. I mean, like, I'm just thinking about something simple like the mold in the grout in the shower, right?
Yeah.
We got, it's okay. It's not a big deal yet, right? I don't have to clean it yet, right? It's just not a big deal. But that's when it becomes a big deal, right?
It can build up. It can build up over time, and then it gets harder and harder to clean.
Right.
And mold is what's called a saprophytic organisms. It degrades and it destroys things.
Right.
So the mold in the grout, if you don't regularly clean it, it's eventually going to eat into the grout hard enough that you'll never get it out. And at that point, it could ruin the backer board behind you, and then you get into rot. So simple home maintenance is the key.
Well, I think one of the things you came over to our house and we pulled back the washing machine.
Yeah.
And we saw some swelling in the foot, the
baseboard, the speed base. Yeah.
Yeah. Speed base. Right. And we thought, oh no, we've got a water problem, but it really wasn't. What probably really wasn't a water problem. It's because we used the wrong material.
Well, yeah, I would. Sometimes it's not a good idea to put, the kind of base you're talking about is made out of MDF, medium density fiberboard. It absorbs moisture. Probably not the best idea to put it on tile in a wet room like a laundry room.
Right. Okay.
So it did absorb the moisture, and it can create some problems behind it.
Right, because we got panicked. Because Linda got panicked because we were like going, "Oh my gosh, do we have a leak?" I mean, but I visually and physically, checked every line that was coming out of the washer. It was, matter of fact, there was dust and but I mean, there was no active water, and there was nothing in the sheetrock that indicated.
Well, that's a good example of where something comes up on a home inspection. You may want to investigate further. Well, I can see that baseboard had been wet. You can see that baseboard had been wet. We don't know if it's still wet.
Right.
So then we put a moisture meter on it. And is it dry? It's dry. Right. But we didn't know until we discovered it.
Right.
But that's just another thing where you do your investigation, you find the problem, or you find what you think might be the problem, and then you investigate till you come to a conclusion. Well, it had gotten wet.
Right.
It's not wet now. So it's probably not an ongoing issue, but we still need to correct it.
Right. Because we're still going to need to replace it. And we're going to have to replace it with another product.
Yeah. I'd go back with wood or PVC or vinyl base.
Right.
Yeah.
Something that we could do because, it just never occurred to any of us that we're in a tiled room where we've got a washer and a dryer, where we've got both heat and moisture kind of working, which kind of creates a nice little environment for all sorts of things happening.
There's all kinds of building materials today that probably they're done for a certain reason, right?
Right.
So the kind of product that you're referring to is called speed base. It's made out of MDF. The reason the builders use it is because it holds paint. They only need to put one coat of paint on it, and it's pretty and done. Whereas wood, you have to prime and 2 coats.
Right.
So in order to speed up the building process, they've used a product that's not very sensitive to water.
Right.
And can cause issue. The same thing's happening. The reason I stay as busy as I do is because everybody likes an open floor plan, right?
Right. Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
So in order to get an open floor plan, you don't use dimensional lumber. You don't use 2x10s. So the house is framed with TJIs, which it looks like if you can imagine the old metal I-beam. It's an I-beam made out of composite material. Well, the top is LVL, which is a type of plywood, and the middle is OSB. You can span 24, 36 feet with those things. The problem is mold grows on digestible cellulose. The number one source of digestible cellulose in a home is wood glue. Those things are held together with wood glue. and you put them in a crawl space that's 80% humidity, 75 degrees, I've been in houses we can actually write our name on the joist. There's so much mold. So that's an example of, you want an open floor plan, great, but the product that the builder uses to get that open floor plan is not conducive to the overall health and structural stability of the home in the long run.
Okay, all right. Now you've opened up a can of worms for me.
I got it. Lots of worms.
Did you open up a can of worms? So is this something like when people are building new homes, right? And I'm assuming that this is a product that's being put in new homes.
If your house has rooms more than 20 feet wide,
yeah,
at any given point, you probably have LVLs in them.
Really? Now,
or TJIs.
I mean, is this something where people could contact you and say, hey, can you take a look at what
it's better to catch it early.
Right. I mean, right. When they're in the building process, is it, I mean, is it something you could come out and you go, yeah, I don't know that you want to do this?
Well, they have to do it. But the problem is, again, mold is a symptom. So we got to control the moisture. So if you do a sealed crawl space or a dehumidifier, keep the crawl space dry, not an issue. But in an unregulated crawl space, or an untemperature controlled or not humidity controlled, they're going to mold. It's just if it molds quick enough for you to pay for it or the next homeowner to pay for it, but it's going to happen.
That's good. So, I mean, that's awesome because they can just reach out to you. All right. So one of the things we also have here in North Carolina, but it's common on the East Coast because they call them nor'easters, right?
Yeah,
we have
storms.
We have these hurricanes that can, they do very bizarre things where, because water can get anywhere, it seems. Let's talk about hurricanes and then, doing restoration work, kind of when you've had those big storms. What is your biggest challenge when you're dealing with that?
Most of the storm damage is either going to be wind-driven rain, roof failures, or flooding, right? So that's the three things. The flooding is always more severe, especially because they consider seawater or rising water is considered grossly unsafe. It's contaminated. The technical term is it's category 3 water. And that means anything non-structural that it touches has to be removed. So if you get a room that's flooded, you're going to take out the sheetrock to 2 to 4 feet, depending on how high the water was, because it can harbor bacteria and molds and fuel. If your neighbor had a fuel tank underground and it starts bobbing up in a flood, then you got fuel oil in your house. So it's considered grossly unsanitary. We got to do a lot of demolition, a lot of cleanup. The roof stuff is it depends on how bad the roof damage is, but it can reach all the way to the first floor. It could just be on the floor with directly underneath the roof. Hurricanes are hard because wind-driven rain can come in sideways.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
And your house is not really built to withstand rain from the side. So sometimes we'll find it coming in through windows. That people said they've never, and you'll find it under the window. So after a storm, if you're worried, the best thing to do is hire somebody that has moisture meters or thermal imaging cameras to go look, because sometimes water will show up in weird places.
Do you have stuff like that?
Yeah, we have those.
So they can call you to do that too?
They can call me to do that too.
All right.
My kids call it predator vision because it's the thermal imaging. You can walk and you can see where someone's walked in the carpet.
Really?
And so that's how we find water in walls.
That's so cool.
Yeah, because the water will show up cooler because it's evaporating in a wall.
Okay, so now I got to ask. Funniest story of doing remediation or something hilarious.
I think we talked one time about I got a whole boatload of X-rated and R-rated stories, but one that was kind of funny to me personally was we were doing we found some mold in a house in Cary. It was actually a fairly 12,000 square foot house. It was a big house. Had French garden or English garden in the front and the back, very well maintained, but he had a little bit of mold in the basement. It was a walk-in basement. So, 10 feet tall, full height. So the dirt on the front of the house is probably 12, 15 feet deep.
Right.
Well, he was having mold come in the back room. We put moisture meters on it and it was showing it was wet. So we said, there's obviously water coming through your foundation. He's like, I've got superior walls, which are poured in place walls.
Right.
We're saying, well, where's your French drain around the house? Do you know where the water comes out? It's supposed to come out. And he said, I don't know. So I tell you what, we'll bring some guys over. We'll dig in the backyard, corner of the house till we find it. So a couple of days later, we show up. We start digging on the corner of the house. We hit the pipe, and it was just like you'd see in a cartoon. Water shot up about 40 feet straight up in there, as tall as his roof, because he must have held 40 or 50,000 gallons of water in the waterproofing on the side of the house. It looked like a geyser. Everybody's running. We're running. I mean, dirt, mud, everything's flying. Here comes all that water. And I was like, yeah, your French drain's clogged. We figured out what the problem is. So, but, you know, it looked like a geyser going off behind this poor guy's house.
That's funny. So your French drain's clogged. Check for that too. As you're doing your inspection, check for your French drains too. Yeah. You've been great. This has been awesome. It's gone so fast. Tell people, I hope you've enjoyed it, by the way.
No problem. If you ever want to do after hours with Jay, I can tell you all the stuff that we found in the attics and crawl spaces and hoarders' homes and all kinds of stories, because those will take up
so
an hour itself.
So yeah, it would be. Tell people how they can get a hold of you and contact you, and if they have questions or if they want to bring you out and say, hey, look, can you take a look?
Yeah, we're kind of a referral only. So we appreciate the phone calls and looking at our website is probably the best way. You can go to rcsmold.com or sealedcrawlspaces.com. Okay. Both of those are my websites. The two, kind of the tripod of my business is mold remediation, insulation, and waterproofing. Okay. And you get some real good information there, and you can always call.
So it's rcsmold.com
and sealedcrawlspaces.com.
And sealedcrawlspaces.com.
Yep. Take a look around. You'll see some projects. Okay. You'll see some pictures. What it looks like when we do our work, and then you've got my personal contact information there. Feel free to reach out.
Well, you know what? There's been a love meter going on because you've gotten you got some hearts that have been coming up as you've been here.
I think my wife and my mother are watching. So I wouldn't, but hopefully it's all good.
That's all good. Thanks, Ben.
All right, thank you, sir. Be well.
And ladies and gentlemen, you know what? That's the show. Where's real estate right now? Listen, you know what? You have a lot of choices. You chose us. I appreciate you so much. So I say to everywhere, all over the world, thank you for watching. And you know what? Ciao, everybody.